I think what we'll do is I'll go ahead and let you do a little more of an intro. We'll each introduce ourselves a little more in detail to know a little bit more about us, and I'll start, and then we'll go from there. I'm Dorinda Wilson, and I'm married to Daryl, and we have been married for 33 years and have 8 kids, ages 18 to 32. We homeschooled all of them from the beginning, so we've been doing this for over 28 years, and we also have our 10th grandbaby on the way, so yeah.
My name is Rebecca Spooner, and I have 5 children. My youngest is 9, and my oldest is turning 16. My husband and I have been married, coming up on 17 years, and we are currently traveling across the United States away from our home and looking for the land that God has for us. So if you hear of it, please tell us.
Hi, I'm Lee Bortons. I'm the founder of Classical Conversations. My husband Robert and I have 4 grown sons. We started homeschooling back in 1983, so I'm kind of one of the grandmas of the movement. Rob and I have been married for over 40 years, and right now Classical Conversations is just expanding really rapidly, and I just want to thank all of you for what you've done to help the classical education movement.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, everyone. So the title of this workshop is, Am I Doing Enough? And I think that's a really great question because it's a question that I actually get a lot. How do I know if I'm doing enough? So I think we're going to start out by, I'll have maybe each of us can kind of answer, like, how do we typically answer that question when someone comes to you and says, how do I know I'm doing enough? Rebecca?
I love being the one to start.
Yeah.
Super fun.
Put you in the hot spot. Give myself a few minutes to think here. No, I'm kidding.
Some of you may have heard, because I did a session on this very topic, but my first question when people come to me with that is to turn it back to them and say, well, what is your definition of success? I think that question of am I doing enough really comes from deep insecurity within us, and it comes from the world's model that we are ultimately really trying to do and recreate in our homes, and it comes from just our own insecurities. And so my question is, how do you define success? Because if a successful homeschool is based on academics and is based on grades and GPAs and all of those things, then your answer for am I doing enough is probably going to be academic related. But if your question for am I doing enough is am I raising my kids in the way they should go, then you're going to have a very different result, and you're going to have a very different journey because your focus is not the same.
Yes, so I think Rebecca had a really good answer there, and I just guess I would add to that, are you doing enough for whom? To think about that too. So, my short answer to am I doing enough is probably not, because there will never be enough time, enough money, enough kids, enough resources, enough whatever it is in your own strength to do anything. But if you turn the tables and say, Lord, I'll do it in your strength, you will find that your resources and your energy and your money and everything else that's needed are unlimited. So it's first getting your eyes off of your own problems and putting them onto Him, because He says, seek first the kingdom of God, and all the rest will be added unto you. I don't think we believe that enough.
And I think, too, that often that question comes from a place of just wanting to do a good job. You know, we want to do right by our kids. At the end of the day, we want to feel like we did well, you know. And so in that respect, I don't think there's anything wrong with wondering that or asking that question. And I asked that question of myself several times through the years, but I remember one time in particular that really just sort of stands out from all the other times because it really helped get me on a good trajectory. I remember thinking to myself, if there were a camera in our house and someone saw what we were doing every day, they would say, this is a failure. Like, these kids are not going to turn out. You're missing so many things. And you also realize how many different answers people might give. So you know, that whole idea of thinking about what anybody else would think, you kind of have to throw that out the window. But, you know, at the same time, it's a little intimidating, you know, to think that, you know, you would come against that much resistance or negativity or whatever. So I remember taking it to the Lord. Like, I feel peaceful about what we're doing, but then when I think about that, other people looking in and their, appalling faces and expressions, it was intimidating to me. So I just prayed about it. I said, Lord, how do I know? Like, I just don't think there's a way to know if you're doing enough. And I think that's intentional. So we lean into the Lord. So I prayed and I said, Lord, how do I know that this is enough? It seems like it would be pathetic to most people. What do you think? Because that's really what matters. And he brought me back to the story of the loaves and the fishes. And he said, remember, Jesus asked the disciples to bring them. Well, first he said, here's 5,000 people plus, go feed them, right? He was asking them to do something that was impossible, right? And they said, well, we can't do that. We don't have the resources. How often have we felt like that when we're homeschooling, right? This impossible job. I don't think I have the resources. And he told them, bring me what you have. So he asked them to bring what they had, not what they didn't have, right? So they brought what little they had, and we all know it was very meager. And he blessed it, and he made it more than enough. And he kept reassuring me that you just bring me what you have, everything you have, and I will make sure that I bless it and multiply it and make it enough. And that is exactly what he did. So just to encourage you in that. So, okay, I'm thinking that we could take a question if you guys have some specific questions when it comes to wondering if you're doing enough. Does anyone have questions? I know we didn't really give you a lot of time to think about it, did we? So, you have any more comments on this while they're thinking about questions?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Oh, she's got a question. Go.
Oh, that was quick. Yeah. Okay, so since this is a recording and I'm sure that people can't hear, we want to make sure this gets on the recording. This mom is basically asking what it looks like to navigate homeschooling several different ages, having older kids and little ones, and how can you, I think relating back to the question, how can you have some confidence that it's enough when you've got all this going on?
So I would say two things. One more philosophical and the other practical, which is what you asked for. So philosophically, it takes a little bit of time, but you can get there. To remember, we're not bringing school home. We're homeschooling, and they're inherently different. And there's lots of books on what I mean there. But practically, I was in the situation that you're describing. And so what I did was scheduled twice a week with the older ones a half-hour to an hour-long session because they saw all the needs of the children as well as our family as a whole, my husband, work, all those things. And so the older two knew that twice a week I was going to give them my full attention for 30 minutes, or even longer if they needed it. And what we found is that by having that scheduled time with them, they prepared for the time with me, and it was very sacred time. And I never hardly have needed 30 minutes. It was just a place for them to say, Mom, I just really needed you to help me edit this, or I just needed to help with this math problem. They were self-sufficient students when they were older, but they still needed my guidance and direction. And so it held all of us accountable for a short amount of time throughout the weeks that wasn't disruptive.
Yeah, I would say, there's so many practical, and there's more questions to be asked. Are we talking high school, or are we talking like middle school, or are we talking just an older elementary age? I think from a practical standpoint, for sure, there's all sorts of different things that we can do, right? Practically speaking, for our younger kids, you can have busy bags, and you can pull things out at certain times, and you can work around nap schedules, and all of those things that I'm sure you're already navigating and trying. I would say, as far as confidence goes, those, you have to base your confidence on him, not basing your confidence on even the world standards or your own expectations of yourself, or sometimes your children's expectations of you. And so I think just asking yourself, taking the time and praying about it and asking him, God, what does my child need? Because you may feel like they need all of this or all of that, but what he says is actually sometimes our kids actually do need a little bit of independence. Sometimes they do need the help. Sometimes they need the one-on-one. And so when we take it to him, I do think that he has specific answers and he can help us with those things. And yes, give us even keys and strategies and ideas like those things that we can try from a practical standpoint that may work for a season until they stop working. And then we try something else. So, yeah.
That's really good. And I'm adding to that something a little more, in the, I guess it would be in the philosophical department. I think as a mom with a lot of kids, sometimes you can feel guilty because you think, well, gosh, we had all these kids, and you think it's because you had all these kids that you won't be able to give the kids, because that's just a cultural thing that we hear, because, that's just how our culture is. But when we look at it from God's perspective, he is the one who weaved your family together. He is the one who gave you these children. He is the one who creates life. We don't. So whatever your family looks like, that is the family that God has given you. And if that's the family he's given you, and he's called you to homeschooling, he's going to make a way. So I'm totally, on the same page with you guys. Like, seek the Lord. He has something specific for your family, and it's a matter of course, keeping your values and your priorities in focus as you're thinking through and praying through what God might have for you. Because I think we kind of get this idea that every family looks somewhat the same, and we can have some similarities, but the truth is every family is unique, and God has a different plan for each of us. But there's a lot to learn along the way, and I guess at the end of the day, it's such a wonderful way for our faith to grow. Our trust in God as we watch him answer our prayers. He says in James 1 that if we ask for wisdom, he will give it generously. He's not going to hold back. But we have to believe and not doubt, and because otherwise we're just unstable. We've got to go to him. We've got to know that he wants to answer our prayers and that he will answer our prayers. And sometimes we have to be patient. There's a waiting time. I think that during that waiting time, a good thing to do is just be really observant of your kids and just sort of the flow of your day to get a better idea of how the day should go. So he's faithful. I just can vouch for that. He's very, very faithful. So does anyone else have a question? Yes.
I have a question. You're close. I'm going to bring this up to you. I have a question, mostly for Lee, but I'd love to hear your take on it too. I'm homeschooling my 9-year-old granddaughter, and we're doing classical conversations, and this will be her 3rd year in foundations, and we're going into essentials. And I just wanted to know what you feel we should bring in additionally. Because I'm starting to think, maybe we need like a science curriculum, maybe we need a history. I mean, I know I already delve in further into the memory work. And then, in essentials, people are saying you need language arts, you don't need language arts. There's a lot of stuff going around. So I was just curious to know what your take on that is.
Yeah, and thanks. I mean, that's one of those kind of concrete, am I doing enough questions? What else am I supposed to be doing, right? And so I would say, one, kudos to you as a grandma, working with your next generation. I'm sure that by itself has its own difficulties. But it's called essentials because it's the thing that's essential. Everything else isn't. You don't need to do science curriculum when their children are little. What you need to do is teach them to go look up. They need to spend a lot of time in the dirt. They need to be on their backs looking at clouds, right? And we forget that is actually the best education that you can give them, especially for the children or little children, is the hands-on things. So I think look at it this way, and then you can expand upon it. I felt like I was successful at the end of any of our school days if we woke up and we got our devotions done and we did some math problems. And why do we do math problems? Because my husband said we had to do that. All right? So that was honoring him. And then I can't function if the house isn't at least halfway organized. So we did those three things. And then we always went to bed reading. So the older ones might be reading a science text or they might be reading their Latin book, right? But they were reading. So whatever we did during the day then was just what naturally fit in with the life that we were living. So whether it was car school, which I recommend you take great advantage of, they're strapped in. Do not give them any technology. Right? That's when you can do, whether it's memory work or listening to books together, or, whatever it is. And then the older ones, of course, they have jobs to do, whether it's chores at your home, depending what their age is, or my children all had to have outside employment by the time they were 12. So they had to be able to fit in throughout the day just whatever other things they needed to do besides the reading, which normally meant writing and maybe doing some logic or something like that. So I would pat myself on the back at the end of the day if we woke up doing devotions and doing some math, and I mean some math. Sometimes it was just 10 minutes of it, but it was the habit, is what I'm teaching my children, and then going to bed reading at night. I couldn't control what was going to happen in the middle of the day. I don't know what's going to occur, but we had a skeleton of ideas and places and things that we could do as the time and energy afforded itself.
Oh, that's really good. I love that. I can add to that. I'm kind of along the same lines, maybe a little more structure, but again, some days it did not happen, But that idea of just having a skeleton schedule and then kind of just flowing with things throughout the day. But one thing that I discovered was when we had 6 kids, 9 and under, I was trying really hard to get 4 days a week of homeschooling done. What I mean by that is like maybe an hour and a half of some kind of workbooky things with the 2 older ones that were 7 and 9. And it just was not happening because there were all these little ones, and it's not that they were, out of control children. They were just little and they had needs and took up time and, So I remember just praying and just being like, Lord, I feel like a failure. Again, I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I would like to have 4 days a week that we're getting this little bit that we're trying to get done every day. But I can't seem to do it. And I just heard the response was, can you just be happy with 3? And I was like, yeah, actually I can. I mean, like if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it, And so that's what we did. And I realized when that stress came off and I watched our kids throughout the day after that, I realized how much they were learning just from being a family and doing chores and some different things like that, just living family life together. The other thing that happened is I realized that as they got a little bit older, I was trying to eventually add in some science and history, right? They're all still in elementary school. It just wasn't going to happen. It was not going to happen. And finally I went, how much do I remember about history and science in grade school? Well, only the things I was interested in, right? So let's let those just be interest-led things. And then when we get into high school, we can do a little, a lot more in-depth, that kind of thing, because developmentally they're just more ready for it then. And that was just the plan that worked best for us. So I did not do anything formal, science or history related. We just plodded through the consistency of a little bit of math and some reading and some writing every day. So yeah, that was a very similar plan. So, but it was the plodding that was good, and the consistency and the simple daily routine.
I will say that especially when it comes to language arts, there's a lot of concerns with language arts. I see so many concerns with language arts. Language arts is the art of communication. And so you have spelling, you have grammar, you have vocabulary, you have writing. We can get different curriculum for all of those different things on top of all our subjects, which for every single subject you're doing, your children are also reading and they are also writing. We drill and kill our kids with these subjects. We put so much on them, and then we think we need to add more and more and more. I'm not saying what you are doing is right or what you are doing is wrong, but I am saying that Facebook and social media and our groups and our friends and our co-ops and our communities and other homeschool parents do not get to answer that question for you. They don't. I'm telling you, if I were to go on right now and say what my homeschool day looks like on social media, I would be inundated with comments of everybody who thinks that I should add 8 million other things. The world is going to constantly tell you you need more. That's FOMO, that's comparison. Welcome to our culture, welcome to our world. So don't go there. Don't let that be your pressure. So we can look at what other people are doing, we can look at the resources that are available to us, and maybe for you and for your family, you feel like, let's dive deeper, let's do more. It's fitting in the season, it's exciting. Follow peace and follow joy. If you don't have peace and you don't have joy in your homeschool, you're doing too much. You're doing too much. Follow peace and follow joy, because that is how it is supposed to be. And it is not impossible. It's elusive. It's very elusive, but it is not impossible. That's a lie from the enemy. It does exist. You can have it. You can love homeschooling.
I love that. I heard a quote once that said, more isn't necessarily better, it's just more. So, you had a question back there? Okay, so the question is basically a dad asking, how do we know we're doing enough, and how do you navigate figuring out like who's doing what or what their roles are, I guess is what you're saying in the homeschooling? Okay.
So since I've been married the longest, I should have an answer of some kind. So first, for my husband to do well with our homeschool, I had to do well as a wife. And so I developed the habit of saying to him every day, I'm sorry you have to go to work, but thank you for doing so that I didn't resent the fact that he wasn't around sometimes, right? So that may not be your situation. Maybe your husband works remotely now. But for me, I had to learn to get my heart right so that he knew it was all going well. And then the second one is our children's hearts. My husband was very, very good to relay that whether he was in the room or not, he was in the room. And with 4 sons, that was crucial, right? And so people want to know about, my children acting out or doing things to fight back on homeschooling or being belligerent to me. They were afraid to. Now, does the fear of the Lord, where does that start with? The fear of your Father. And, of course, the fear of the Lord is a good thing. I'm not saying they were afraid they were going to hit him, or he was going to hit them, right? I'm saying they knew what the boundaries were, and that Dad was doing his duty, and that they would be protected no matter what, because they saw him protect me.
Well, I think for me, I remember, I think for a lot of families, it's moms pulling off most of the homeschooling. There are some dads are involved, academically and all of that, and I think that's wonderful. That was not what it looked like at our house. My husband went to work every day. He was actually self-employed, so it was a matter of, okay, Dad's working now, and we're homeschooling now, and we try to keep that somewhat separate. So it was like he went to work, he was there, but he wasn't there, kind of thing. But for us, one of the things that helped along the way was when I realized that even though he wasn't present for all the details and didn't know all the ins and outs of our homeschooling, I could still go to him and ask him questions because God had placed him in that role in our family. So once you understand that when God ordains your roles as mom and dad and husband and wife, he can give us wisdom beyond our own abilities. So before I would ask him a question, I would pray and ask the Lord to give him wisdom beyond his knowledge of what was going on. And I found that he would come back with such great ideas, and it was just so helpful. I will say that when we first started doing this, sometimes his ideas were really, really simple. And I was like in my head going, this is never going to work. It's never going to work. So I wouldn't say it out loud, but I just wouldn't do it. And so then I just keep beating my head against the wall. And finally I would give up and say, okay, I'll try it his way. And then I would do it, and I'd be like, why didn't I do this a long time ago? Sometimes our husband's answers can feel like they're oversimplified, but they're actually making our life easier. So that was something that I gradually learned to really appreciate. And then also with the boys, that was a big deal. Like I was really frustrated with our teen boys at one point. They weren't listening. It was like I wasn't even in the room and I was talking and that kind of thing. So anyway, I unloaded on my husband, and at dinner, we were on a date, and I'm like, this is going on, and telling him everything, and he just listened, and then we got in the car, and then he looked at me and said, I need to tell you something. And I said, what? He goes, but I don't want to hurt your feelings. And I said, it's okay. I'm okay. I've kind of unloaded. I'm ready to hear something. I need a solution. And he goes, you use too many words. And I was like, I know this already. I know that boys don't do well with too many words. So I was like, you're right. And so I went home and I went to the boys and I said, this has been going on. This is what your dad said. Is he right? And they go, yeah, he is right. They said, Mom, we would rather feel physical pain than listen to you talk. And I was like, and they weren't being disrespectful. Like, they were being honest with me. And so I said, okay, so I had to work super hard at just stopping, pause, think first. What are the most important things I want to communicate to them? And how can I do that in 15 seconds or less? And then I did have consequences ready for them. But that was like this great just aha moment with my husband where I was like, okay, yeah, I'm talking too much. They're not listening anymore. They're tuning me out. He said they don't respect you when you talk too much. So, yeah, husbands just play a really great supportive role along the way. But I would say the other thing when it comes to schooling is most of our kids, economics, politics, budgeting, and work ethic, that stuff happened around the dinner table so much and in conversations when my husband was working alongside of them and he was instilling a strong work ethic in them. So it was those kinds of things. He just does better doing it in a conversation form, but they were still learning all of that. And they hold to all of those values to this day. So, yeah, it doesn't have to look bookworky is what I'm saying.
No, I can't speak to a medical crisis.
I can. Our youngest son was born with transposition of the greater arteries and 2 holes in his heart, and we did not know this until after he was born. So we had nothing in place in terms of child care and all of that. And so the first thing that my husband did, they said he needs surgery, open heart surgery at 3 days old, and he'll minimum be in the hospital for 3 weeks. But we didn't know for sure how long it would be. It ended up being 2 months. But at the very beginning, my husband looked at me and said, okay, we need to come up with a sustainable plan, something that we can live with for weeks on end. And that was one of the wisest things I had ever heard. And so we did. We came up with a plan and walked through that. He finally came home after 2 months, but it doesn't end there. We come home and there's all these medications he needs, and he's very needy. All of a sudden, everything the nurses were doing, now I'm doing. And we have 7 other children, 13 and under. And so, so that whole 2 months, there was no schoolwork happening. And then when we came home, there was no schoolwork happening. And I just, believe it or not, I just had so much peace about that. And I looked around and I prayed and I looked around, watched my kids, and I thought, you know what? They are learning so much right now about how to handle grief and obstacles and giving them that time and space to grieve over the fact that their brother wasn't well and couldn't come right home and all of that. And they were still very little, so they don't know how to process all of that, except they periodically visit their grief for a few minutes and then they're done because they're little and they can't, so it's just being able to do it in a really organic way that allows everyone the time and space they need for grief and all that. So just a very basic, simple routine is what we stuck to. And same thing when our oldest grandson was stillborn, not expected obviously at all. And just the grief that happened there and walking that all out, your kids are learning in the midst of all. They're learning far more than they would be learning from books at that time. And understanding that God is sovereign over all of that, and he allows these things in our lives, and he has good in it for us. And so asking him to give us the eyes to see, Lord, what are you doing here? And what good is happening here? Help us to see it and help us to follow your lead in it, because he's doing wonderful things in the midst of the crisis.
Yeah, I haven't walked through, I mean, I know what some people walk through, the stories that we hear, and cancer and death, and I mean, there's so much brokenness and hardship in our world. But we have had complicated births, and again, our kids were very young, so I know it's a different circumstance if your kids are older in their teens, and there's a lot more processing that happens. But just for us, at least when the kids were little, we did nothing. We did nothing. And I was a same thing as Dorinda, just absolute peace about it. And I encourage others to, whether it's difficult pregnancies, whether it's chronic illness, if it's a prolonged thing and we're talking years, that can be a different story. But if you're talking about a season, if you're talking about a number of months, if you're talking about, I just think there has to be that peace to process what you're going through and to be present in what you're going through. And yes, your kids are watching you. They are watching. You are modeling for them faith. You are modeling for them hope. You are modeling for them a relationship with God where you are anchored in the midst of a storm. Do you know how many times our kids can't stand in the world today? This is what we see. We raise our kids in the ways of God, and then we send them off into the world, and you see this crisis where our children, they can't stand. They can't stand. How can we raise our kids to stand? Hardship. We want to protect them from it all. And I know we do, and it's our heart to. But do you know how character is produced? Through hard things. So those hard things that are happening, although they are hard, they are the very things that can root and ground your kids in their relationship with him. And when they see you stand in the midst of hardship, they are learning how to stand even in the midst of hardship.
And understanding, again, God is sovereign over that. So this is part of what he is using to prepare them for life. You don't know. I've talked to older kids who were homeschooled by a parent who had disabilities or whatever, and they become passionate about something that they wouldn't otherwise have become passionate about, finding a cure for something or working with those types of people. So you just don't know. God knows. He knows how best to prepare our kids for life, and he does use these crises to do that. Yeah. Go ahead. Oh.
Well, we don't bring school home, so every day is a day to learn. So we're lifelong learners. That's what we try to teach our kids. So we did reading and devotions and a little bit of math every day.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah, so the question was about schooling year-round. I want to make sure the recording picks that up. I forgot to do that. But we did year-round. But how it looked for us was we did the bulk of it during the school year, and then in the summer, it was a couple days a week, just a little bit of math, because we didn't want to do all the review in the fall. My thing was, let's just keep plodding forward, one step at a time. As long as we're moving forward, that's what matters. And it kept the kids, my kids do better with it, I think most kids do, with a routine. If we busted that routine completely in the summer, it was just not. They wouldn't behave themselves. It was like chaos, So it grounded us a little bit to have just a little bit of that normalcy, and then we hit it more heavily in the fall. So, yeah.
And I will say that every single year, every single year. I plan to year-round homeschool, and every single year I fail miserably. So if there's anyone out there that aims to do that and then feels like a miserable failure because of life and because your husband's off and there's vacation time and life in the summer is different often, that's okay too for a season, and that though it feels like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back when that happens and that break, that's okay. And they catch up and you get back into the routine. And so there's grace. I would say have grace for yourself and grace for your kids.
Right. There was a question back here. What age are we talking here? Out of school? Okay. Right. So the question is, this mom has a 19-year-old who's out, has graduated, and is feeling like there's some things that mom didn't teach him that she should have. Apparently, that's how he feels. So, anybody want to speak to that? You have grandkids.
Yeah. So our 4th son was pretty neglected. That's what he tells me.
You don't seem convinced.
One day he came home. I was a freshman after the freshman year of college, and he comes home. He looks at me. He says, "Mom, why didn't you teach me about Pocahontas?" And I looked at him and said, "Son, 1, I might have, and you weren't paying attention. And 2, I couldn't teach you everything." Right? We're all going to have gaps. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. And so they just need that wisdom and maturity to eventually say, oh, nobody knows all of it. And so that's why you would never want to compare your knowledge with somebody else. Mm-hmm. Just to encourage them. But you know what? Maybe we did, and you can also say, maybe I did do this badly. But look at what we did well. Right. And have them focus on that. And so this strength can help you with your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got anything for this?
Pass.
Hard pass. Yeah, and I think just the idea of comparing ourselves is never wise. That's what the Bible says, to compare ourselves with others isn't wise. And your son is probably just trying to kind of make his way in the world, and so he's trying to figure out his place, his identity, and all of that. And I say that, as homeschooling parents, I think one of the gifts that we give our kids typically is that if they need to learn something, they know how. So if there's a gap there that you want to fill, have at it, Go ahead and do it. But I think just letting them know, I think I love what you said. We did a lot of things well, but we can't do everything perfectly, So, and don't take that heavy on. Don't do that. He'll figure it out eventually. It's funny when your kids become parents, how much smarter your parents are. Any other questions? Anybody? Almost out of time too, right? 6 minutes. Any other questions? We got about 6 minutes left. It's your last chance. Okay, there's one. 2, actually. Go ahead. Okay, so this mom is asking about high school. What things, those of us who've graduated kids, what things would we toss to the wayside? What things would we keep? Kind of what would our priorities be?
So I would say I only have one regret in all of my time with our 4 sons, and that was that I didn't teach them to memorize more scripture. Because it doesn't matter where or when or what they're doing, that will always it will help them. That's other than that, I woke up every day saying, okay, I'm the queen mom, Lord. What are we doing? And I knew they didn't have enough money or time to do what we needed to do, but He was going to make sure that we did what He wanted us to do. And so preparing them with that kind of attitude, knowing when your teenagers look at you and see you never gave up on them, then no matter what the hardships were, they start to remember that when they're 23, 24, 25. And so to just there's a phrase I use that describes what all three of us have been saying, and it's this: milk the cow. That if they see you doing a little bit every day and you're always standing for them, you'll raise children who will do that for your grandchildren.
I think also we've all been told, once they get into high school, all of a sudden there's all this pressure to do things a certain way, where maybe up to this point we've had a really good rhythm, and now all of a sudden, like, the switch gets flipped and we have all this stress. And I think continue on in the rhythm that you're in, that's been working for your family. Don't necessarily change everything up for high school, because at the end of the day, and I've noticed this in the vendor hall even, there are so many wonderful different avenues that our teens can take once they graduate that are so much more beneficial than going to college. So we've got this thing in our heads that, college is the only path to success. It is absolutely not. In fact, I'm beginning to think it's a path to disaster most of the time. So think outside the box. I think the other thing, I really encouraged ownership with our high schoolers, that they were owning what they were doing and they were responsible for it. And so that when they got that diploma, like, that was their diploma. I didn't nag them there, and I didn't drive them there, but I started out, I walked alongside of them, I supported them, and let them make as many decisions as possible, so that by the time they graduated, they were as independent as possible. And again, looking back, going, hey, I set this goal, and I met it. So it was about me sitting down with each child before they got into high school and saying, okay, this is the trajectory. How do you want to get to this goal? And so teaching them to set a goal and letting them learn what it looks like to take the steps to get there. So it's really less about the curriculum and more about the character formation, so that they're ready to, move past high school and into adulthood.
And just as somebody who was homeschooled myself, and I can stand on the other side and say to my parents that it was the greatest gift that they ever gave me. It was the greatest thing that they did for me. And there's so much fruit in my life because of it. And where I am today is not because of the amount of academics that they stuck into my brain. It's not because I got into a good college or university, because I don't have a degree. I don't have all of that secondary education in me. What I do have is a relationship with God, and I'm telling you that He is the one that establishes our steps. And that is the most important thing. And I know it feels like just a Sunday school answer, but my goodness, when we raise them to follow Him, when we raise them to hear His voice, when that is what we are teaching them first and foremost, then they're going to follow Him into all that He has for them. And God is going to establish them. It is Him who establishes us. It is Him who sets us. It is Him who positions us. And He will be faithful to your children, and He will move them wherever He will move them because of what you instilled in their hearts.
That's good. 1 minute. Okay, we've got 1 minute right over there.
My boys like me.
I'm right there with you. Good relationships with all 8 of our kids. Nobody's like, ugh, mom and dad, ugh. They want to be around us. They want to be with us. There's a friendship there. There's a respect there. So.
And I have multiple stories of times where my kids, I set aside what I was doing because I felt like I was failing. And I stopped, whether it was teaching them to read or I stopped, whatever the lesson we were trying to hammer into their head. And I can tell you time and time and time again, and I know this isn't a specific one because we're out of time, but time and time again, there have been these moments, just these moments where I'll walk in and I'll see my kid where they haven't been listening in church, they're not engaging in the lessons. I wonder, am I even reaching your heart? The most important thing, am I even reaching your heart? Do you even know what I'm teaching you? I feel like, do you even have a relationship with him? And I'll walk in the room and I'll see them just worshiping him, and God just speaks to my heart and he says, this wasn't you, because it's not all on you. It's not all on you. You're not doing this alone. I'm with you. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. And that promise is not just for you. That promise is for your children. And I have seen him fill in the gaps. I have seen him come in and step alongside me in education. And I have seen him teach my children as well in the way that they should go. So it's not all on your shoulders, and he will. And you will have so many stories of it. So many. You won't even be able to recount them.
Right. Right. Well, that sounds like a great thing to end on, right? Thank you all for being here. It was wonderful to spend this time with you. Have a great rest of the day.